All right, we'll call the meeting to order. First, my apologies. We're an hour late, but I wanted to notify people so they didn't come and sit here and wait the hour. And so we will start. So, pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, January 29th, and Section 72 of the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorism Financing Act, statutory review of the Act, we'll hold the hearing. First up, I'll just introduce you as we go through each group. First witness is the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, Luc Boudret, who's the Assistant Director, Dan Lambert, the Assistant Director, Intelligence Operations, and Joanne Leroux, Assistant Director, Regional Operations. So the floor is yours, and then we'll go to OSFI.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting us today regarding your review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. So joining me at the table are my colleagues Dan Lambert, Assistant Director of our Intelligence Sector, and Joanne Leroux, Assistant Director of our Compliance Sector. I'd like to take a few minutes this afternoon to describe FINTRAC's mandate and the role we play in helping to protect Canadians and the integrity of Canada's financial system. I will focus my remarks in particular on the contribution the Centre makes to the money laundering and terrorism financing investigations of Canada's police, law enforcement, and national security agencies. In the interest of time, I have shortened my remarks, but you still have access to my full opening statement. So FINTRAC was created in 2000 by the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act to deter, prevent, and detect money laundering and terrorist activity financing. Under this legislation, FINTRAC, police, national security agencies, and thousands of businesses across the country all have a role to play in creating a hostile environment for those who seek to abuse our financial system or to threaten the security of Canadians. The Act establishes obligations for financial services entities, money services businesses, and other businesses subject to the Act to establish a compliance program, identify clients, monitor business relationships, keep certain records, and report specific types of financial transactions to FINTRAC, including suspicious transactions. Reconnaissant que l'efficacité globale du régime.
Recognizing that the overall effectiveness of Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime is dependent on businesses submitting high-quality and timely financial transaction reports, FINTRAC employs a comprehensive risk-based compliance program that ensures businesses subject to the Act fulfill their obligations. Every year, we complete hundreds of compliance examinations across the country, issue policy interpretations, and respond to thousands of inquiries in order to facilitate and ensure compliance with the Act. As a result of these efforts and an ever-increasing commitment from Canadian businesses, FINTRAC received nearly 25 million financial transaction reports last year. This is up 20% over the past 3 years. I'd like to emphasize that safeguarding this information is an overarching consideration in all aspects of our operations. Clear principles for the protection of privacy are set out in the Centre's governing legislation, which respects the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Privacy Act, and are reinforced by FINTRAC's own operational policies and security measures. The financial transaction reports we receive from Canadian businesses every year are the lifeblood of our analysis and make it possible for us to do our intelligence work and ultimately to help protect Canada and Canadians. Last year, we provided 2015 disclosures of financial intelligence to our regime partners to aid their investigations of money laundering, terrorist activity financing, and threats to the security of Canada. Our financial intelligence is used to assist money laundering investigations in the context of a wide variety of criminal investigations, where the origins of the suspected criminal proceeds were linked to fraud, drug trafficking, corruption, and other criminal offenses.
Most clearly with Project Protect, a unique public-private sector initiative that mobilized partners across the country over the past couple of years to combat human trafficking in the sex trade. With this initiative, Canadian financial institutions committed to tracking the money laundering associated with this illicit activity as a priority of their compliance programs. For our part, we work closely with these institutions and our police and law enforcement partners to develop an operational alert. This alert focuses on the types of financial transactions, financial patterns, and account activities that may raise suspicions of money laundering related to human trafficking and trigger the requirement to send a suspicious transaction report to FINTRAC. As a result of these efforts, we received nearly 4,000 suspicious transaction reports, which led to the production of over 200 financial intelligence disclosures. So to put a human face on this initiative, it has led directly to dozens of young Canadian women being rescued from the most deplorable condition imaginable over the past year. This type of public-private sector initiative is the first of its kind in the world, and we are pleased to see that there has been tremendous interest internationally in understanding and replicating it. Here in Canada, we're hoping for the same level of success with Project Guardian, a similar public-private sector partnership that will see the mobilized efforts of Canadian financial institutions and money services business, FINTRAC and Canada law enforcement agencies brought to bear to combat the trafficking of illicit fentanyl. Alors que nous continuons de contribuer.
As we continue to contribute financial intelligence to the money laundering investigations of Canada's police and law enforcement agencies, we are also playing a key role in combating terrorist activity financing in Canada and abroad. Last year, FINTRAC provided 462 financial intelligence disclosures relevant to terrorist activity financing and threats to the security of Canada. To end, I would like to note that the success of Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime is dependent on the dedicated efforts of all players, from businesses on the front lines of Canada's financial system to prosecutors securing the conviction of money launderers and terrorist financiers. Together, we are producing significant results for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will be pleased to answer your questions.
To all, we may have to invite you back because we lost an hour, and I know there is a lot of questions to FINTRAC. So just to give you that warning in advance, the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions, Christine Ring, Managing Director, Anti-Money Laundering and Compliance Division, and Erin Feeney, Director of the same division. Go ahead, Ms. Ring.
Thank you, and good afternoon. As the Chair said, my name is Christine Ring, and I'm the Managing Director of the AML and Compliance Division at OSFI. With me is Erin Feeney, one of my directors. To respect the members' time for questions, I will also shorten my remarks that were tabled with the clerk. OSFI's mandate is to protect the depositors, policyholders, and creditors of the institutions we supervise while allowing them to compete and take reasonable risks. My division's efforts focus on whether an institution has put in place the appropriate risk management and controls to detect and deter money laundering and terrorist financing. Our supervisory approach allows us access to a wide range of supervisory information, not just information aligned to requirements under Canada's AML legislation. This means that we can see beyond technical compliance and assess the effectiveness of the overall AML ATF governance framework established by a federally regulated financial institution. OSFI's supervisory approach also reflects the nature, size, complexity, and risk profile of an institution. This means that all measures taken by one institution will be effective at all institutions. Some systems or rules can put a reporting burden on entities, regulators, and Canadians that may not result in an optimal balance of privacy, security, and safety and soundness. Finding this balance in an ever-changing world is why I'm happy to appear before our peer agencies, beside our peer agencies before this committee. Together, we would be pleased to answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ring. Turning then to global affairs, I have it as the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, and I guess I don't know what the technicalities are around that, but that's what I have. Mr. Bell, Executive Director, International Crime and Terrorism.
Thank you, Chair. It is in fact Global Affairs Canada, but we have many names of the past, so we recognize them all, and thank you for your memory of this last name. And it's my pleasure to be here before you and before this committee for your review and to support this review. As the Chair said, my name is Jamie Bell. I'm the Executive Director of the International Crime and Terrorism Division at Global Affairs Canada. Criminals and terrorists do not respect national borders. Transnational crime and terrorism, terrorist financing and money laundering are global problems that require global solutions. As a result, Global Affairs Canada is an active partner in the broader efforts of the Government of Canada to counter illicit flows, financial flows. Bien que le ministère n'ait aucune responsabilité directe prévue en vertu de la loi.
Although Global Affairs Canada does not have direct responsibilities under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act and does not receive funding through Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime, our activities support the regime's goals of detecting and deterring money laundering and terrorist financing. Given the international nature of money laundering and terrorist financing, any country that does not have adequate means for prevention, detection, investigation, prosecution, and sanctioning perpetrators is at risk and may cause risk to other countries. To help countries fill those gaps, Canada provides technical assistance through funding projects around the world.
Programs that contribute to enhancing the capacity of beneficiary states to fight terrorism and transnational organized crime through the provision of technical assistance. These two programs are the Anti-Crime Capacity Building Program and the Counterterrorism Capacity Building Program. Both these programs reflect a whole-of-government approach drawing on the expertise of Government of Canada departments and agencies to effectively deliver security capacity building to beneficiary states, supporting them to better manage and respond to security threats. These programs also aim to contribute to Canada's national security and protect Canadian interests, such as the safety of Canadians abroad, the provision of a more stable international environment for Canadian commerce and trade, and to increase Canada's international reputation. À l'heure actuelle, 13 projets opérationnels.
Both programs have a number of thematic anti-crime and counter-terrorism capacities. The capacity-building programs currently have 13 operational projects valued at nearly $11 million.
Different service providers, but primarily through projects implemented by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. In some cases, the Anti-Crime Capacity Building Program and the Counterterrorism Capacity Building Program also fund technical assistance provided directly by other government departments and agencies, with recent projects implemented by FINTRAC and RCMP, for example. These capacity-building projects that Canada has supported have helped to, among other things, improve prevention and detection of money laundering and terrorist financing, and enhance quality, timeliness, and volume of reportable data from reporting entities, equip law enforcement agencies in targeted countries with skills and knowledge to conduct financial investigations, and profiling, including freezing, seizing, and confiscation of assets. And it has helped to improve the understanding of legislative provisions and national legal frameworks related to the anti-money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism. Also of interest to this committee will be the role that Global Affairs Canada plays in the domestic implementation of Canada's international legal obligations with regard to terrorist financing. We oversee the listing regime associated with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1267 through the United Nations Al-Qaeda and Taliban regulations. The United Nations Al-Qaeda and Taliban regulations were created in 1999 under Canada's United Nations Act to implement the UN Security Council Resolutions 1267 and its successor resolutions, which require states to freeze the assets of the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, his associates, and members of Al-Qaeda, and prevent the supply, the sale, the transfer of arms, and technical assistance to them. Once an individual or an entity is added to the UN's consolidated list, all federally regulated financial institutions are obligated to comply with and have a duty to determine whether they are in possession of or in control of the relevant property and to report this to their principal regulator. These include asset freeze, travel bans, and arms embargoes. Finally, Global Affairs Canada also contributes to Canada's engagement at a number of international fora where money laundering and terrorist financing issues are addressed, including the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Counter-ISIL Finance Group, and in a number of bilateral consultations. Pour chacune de ces tribunes, Affaires mondiales Canada.
For each of these fora, Global Affairs Canada coordinates with Finance Canada and other regime partners to ensure that Canada's domestic anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism policies are accurately represented at international meetings and that regime partners are kept apprised of relevant developments at these meetings.
Happy to answer any questions on my department's role in this regime.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Turning to Industry, Science and Economic Development, to Mr. Shan, I may not have that pronounced right, Director General, Marketplace Framework Policy Branch, Strategic and Innovation Policy Section.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the invitation to appear before you. You were close. My name is Mark Sean, and I serve as Director General of the Marketplace Framework Policy Branch in the Strategic Innovation and Policy Sector of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Le secteur englobe de façon générale des domaines politiques tels.
The sector broadly includes such policy areas as innovation, telecommunications, and clean technology. However, my branch specifically analyzes the role of marketplace framework laws in meeting the department's objectives. While the review you are now conducting covers specifically the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, it should be acknowledged that other pieces of legislation contribute to trust and confidence in the marketplace. In that sense, they reinforce the objectives of the PCML-TFA. Most relevant for today's discussion, my branch holds the responsibility for the Canada Business Corporations Act, CBCA, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, and the Competition Act. We are all aware of the fallout from international information leaks that have shown the need for clear and coordinated action to detect and deter money laundering, terrorist financing, tax evasion, and tax avoidance, while continuing to facilitate the ease of doing business in Canada. ISED, alongside government partners, has been at the forefront of a national strategy to strengthen the transparency of legal persons and legal arrangements and to improve the availability of beneficial ownership information.
Decide to nominate a third person as nominee to hold and trade the security on their behalf. In the case of a shareholder, a nominee would be listed as a registered shareholder in the share registry of a corporation. Nominees can be appointed for good business reasons. One need only think of shares of publicly traded companies held through mutual funds or investment brokers. However, legitimate business practices should not foster a climate where secrecy reigns to the benefit of wrongdoers who use the shadow of nominees to facilitate their criminal activity. Corporate governance is an area of shared federal, provincial, territorial jurisdiction in Canada. So the CBCA, the Canada Business Corporations Act, alone is not enough to address the issue of beneficial ownership. Only about 10% of corporations in Canada are federally incorporated, and so an effective legal response to this issue naturally requires strong federal, provincial, territorial cooperation to ensure that we have consistent standards across the country. To this end, following up on budget commitments made in 2017, federal officials have been working with provincial and territorial counterparts towards implementing new standards for corporate and beneficial ownership transparency. Provincial and territorial interest in this process has proven to be strong, and provincial and territorial officials have been engaging with us by providing practical and thoughtful contributions to the development of a Canadian approach. This partnership hit an important benchmark in December 2017, when the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of finance agreed on an initial phase to a legislative strategy to enhance the transparency of beneficial ownership of corporations. The objective is simple and targeted. Corporations should be required to disclose the identity of beneficial owners who control the corporate decision-making process through voting shares or because they are in a position to materially influence company decisions. The details of the approach are currently under discussion with the provinces and territories, but with the proposed changes, Canada would bring its corporate standards further in line with those of other OECD countries. Je devrais aussi mentionner brièvement la pertinence du projet de loi.
I should briefly mention the relevance of Bill C-25 currently before the Senate. If adopted, this bill would improve corporate transparency and accountability through the abolition of bearer share options and warrants. These instruments can be used to transfer securities without their beneficiaries having to register the transfer. The Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, known as PIPEDA, is a technology-neutral and principles-based legislation that came into force in 2001 and sets out the ground rules for how private sector organizations collect, use, or disclose personal information in the course of commercial activities across Canada. It also applies to personal information of employees of federally regulated works, undertakings, or businesses, organizations that are federally regulated such as banks, airlines, and telecommunications companies. As a general rule, PIPEDA requires organizations to obtain the individual's consent for the use, collection, or disclosure of his or her personal information. To obtain consent, organizations are required to inform individuals of the purpose for using, collecting, or disclosing their personal information. Individuals can then choose whether or not to consent to the collection, use, or disclosure of their personal information.
Provides for exceptions to the requirements related to informed consent. For example, organizations subject to PIPEDA can disclose personal information to a government institution without the knowledge or consent of an individual if the institution identifies its lawful authority and indicates that it suspects that the information relates to national security, defence, or international affairs, or for the purposes of enforcing a law of Canada. PIPEDA also makes specific reference to disclosure to government institutions in accordance with the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act. PIPEDA also allows for the disclosure of certain personal information to other private sector organizations without knowledge or consent in cases of suspected fraud or for the purpose of investigating a contravention of a law in Canada. As a statute of general application, PIPEDA has broad scope and generally overrides other provisions that can be found in other federal statutes unless expressly provided for in the other statute. As such, PIPEDA applies generally to all sectors of the economy and does not target specific sectors. Under the PIPEDA framework, some provinces have privacy legislation for the private sector that has been deemed substantially similar to PIPEDA, which means that such legislation applies instead of PIPEDA in some cases. Protection of personal information is also included in several federal and provincial sector-specific statutes. The Federal Bank Act, for example, contains provisions regulating the use and disclosure of personal and financial information by federally regulated financial institutions, and most provinces have legislation dealing with consumer credit reporting. As noted earlier, the presence of other legislation that has privacy-related provisions does not necessarily mean that PIPEDA does not apply. Le ministre de l'Innovation, des Sciences et du Développement.
The Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development is responsible for PIPEDA, while the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, OPC, and the federal courts are responsible for its enforcement. If an individual believes that his or her personal information has been mishandled by an organization, he or she can file a complaint with the Privacy Commissioner, who, as an independent agent of Parliament, will investigate the complaint. The Competition Act is a law designed to protect and promote competition in the Canadian marketplace through administration and enforcement by the Competition Bureau. Most of its key provisions address classic antitrust principles, such as cartel activity and merger review. But the Act also contains a set of civil and criminal provisions that address deceptive marketing, particularly false or misleading representations, which includes mass marketing fraud.
Have on any of these statutes and their relations to the PCMLA TFA. Merci.
Thank you all. Then turning to, just before I turn to questions, you're all aware of the discussion paper on the Finance Department website. I assume, was everyone involved in the assistance in getting that discussion paper there? Okay, thank you. Ms. O'Connell, we'll go to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with FINTRAC. I have a number of questions for everyone, but the purpose of this study that we're working on really is to identify gaps and make recommendations on how to ensure that the legislation is actually working and changing with the times. So one of the areas certainly that has been highlighted as having some gaps is FINTRAC. And recently, or I read recently, so please correct me if anything's incorrect, but as of May 2016, FINTRAC's not been able to levy any fines due to a court challenge. And that seems to be a consistent thread in some of the gaps where the legislation is not meeting the standard rule of law, essentially, and it's being overruled. So this committee is going to have to be tasked with making recommendations to close some of these gaps to ensure that the legislation actually works. And it's my understanding that FINTRAC has been working to come up with a new, to meet the court's recommendations in terms of accountability and transparency, and it's not due out until the summer. So what can you offer to this committee in terms of recommendations or in terms of the issues of the legislation that FINTRAC is completely unable to even levy a fine at this point? So obviously more is needed, and we can't necessarily wait until the summer for these consultations and to make the recommendations of this study. So can you offer up what this committee needs to be looking at to close the gaps in FINTRAC's ability to do its job, essentially?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So you're right. In May 2016, the Federal Court of Appeals in the matters of Kabul Farms and Max Realty agreed with the FINTRAC assessment that entities violated the PCML TFA. So the court recognized FINTRAC authority and assessment that violation occurred. What the court also ruled, essentially, is that the information that was provided to the penalized entities about the penalty amount was insufficient. So the court ruled really on that matter and not on the substance of the FINTRAC authority to issue a penalty. So what we are now reviewing, essentially, is every unique factor that could determine the penalty amount based on the harm done. So those are all criteria that are currently in the legislation. We're committed to being completely transparent about that new method, so we want the reporting entities to be very well informed and understand in plain language what are the consequences of violations under the PCML TFA. It's important for the committee to understand that we do not penalize for money laundering. This is not the role of FINTRAC. we penalize for violations to the PCML TFA, so it is administrative violations. There are approximately 200 violations possible under the Act. So that's what we kind of look at. That's what we have to assess, and we have to determine what is the harm done to the regime when they violate the penalties.
But in fairness, and I don't have a lot of time, so I don't mean to cut you off, but I do have to get this out. The authority isn't challenged, but if your mandate is to make sure that agencies, for example, banks, and that was a major fine that was levied, if banks are not fulfilling their obligations to report, and you don't have the ability, because of a lack of legislation or wording that actually holds up, then how can you actually exercise that authority if you have no teeth? And for at least 2 years, and we still haven't seen the results of this work yet. So is the result of this work, or are the people working on this also consulting with the legal community to ensure that this time it actually stands up? Or should this committee be recommending some further oversight to ensure that, you know, we don't spend another 2 years without any teeth in FINTRAC? Because your authority might be there, but really, what's the authority if you're not able to actually act on it?
Well, we would certainly welcome kind of committee's views on this issue. I think the consultation paper that you have in front of you alludes to this. Whether or not the penalty calculation should be put in regulations and the regs, it is one of the options. One other option that is being looked at, and we're looking for your views as well, is the discretion of the director to name penalized entities. So yes, we are welcoming your views on this. There are consultations ongoing within FINTRAC. The work is ongoing. We're consulting with the Department of Justice as well. And in the next few months, so by summer 2018, we hope that review will be completed. And maybe I can ask my colleague, Madame Leroux, responsible for the compliance program, to provide you further details.
If you can be fairly quick,
yes.
Ms. Leroux.
Yes, I will. I just want to add to the very good question, and we're with you. We try to strengthen the regime program, but the review is ongoing because what the court have said is with the calculation of the penalty. So what's important, like you said, the authority is there, but the calculation is by policy presently. Okay, so the policy in itself, we're reviewing that, and all the case in the pipeline. We have other mechanism to address non-compliance. I think that's the message that's important to retain, is that you know, those filed in abeyance, they will be looked at with the new lens of this new policy. But the thing is, we want to make sure that it meets the transparency, and it's not only for the program of the penalty; it's holistically, because the penalty is imposed after a compliance assessment. So we have to look at transparency from the whole continuum of what we do, and we have other mechanisms like the non-compliance disclosure to law enforcement. So there's other measures that we can take in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Kamish.
So I'm going to direct my questions. Maybe I have two sets of questions. So for Mr. Bell and for OSFI. Mr. Bell, you mentioned drugs at one point, and there are 3 international treaties that Canada belongs to: the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, and the 1988 Convention against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. But the government of Canada has the intention by July 1st of this year to decriminalize and legalize cannabis, and it does form a part of the black market, and it is how some terrorist organizations as well as other illegal organizations finance themselves, and they use the proceeds of trafficking to sustain their organizations. What work has your organization done to get ready for that moment when cannabis becomes legal in Canada? Have you done any work? Is Canada pulling out these treaties? How does it impact the monitoring of organizations that may be doing cannabis today, and we're doing maybe heroin and cocaine to finance their activities, but also going to be doing, and then on July 1st, cannabis will be legal. So how does that fit in? What are you doing to get ready for that moment?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And Chair, if I may, I'd respond by saying that we're here to speak about the Anti-Money Laundering Act and the measures that Global Affairs Canada is involved in overseas with organizations to improve their capacities. We're doing that through organizations like the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and we're providing capacities to various entities abroad to deal with all sorts of crimes and all sorts of matters around drugs, and that includes money laundering associated with drugs. So that will continue, and that work is the work that Global Affairs Canada is focused on.
Mr. Bell, you didn't answer my question. Like, Canada will legalize July 1st cannabis. Cannabis is sold to produce money. Money is then used by organizations. Some of them are terrorist organizations. Some of them are criminal organizations who do it solely. You don't sell drugs just because you sell it because you want to make money, use it for an illicit purpose. So is your department getting ready for that moment Canada has it legalized, and what else are you getting ready for it? Are you doing anything? Are you taking the time to distinguish different organizations, how they finance themselves today, yes or no?
Well, Chair, with respect, I would respond again that we're here to talk about the study into these acts regarding financial matters, and we are in Global Affairs Canada continuing all the same acts, all the same activity abroad that we've been doing to support international crime, anti-crime measures, and we'll continue to do that throughout this year and after the passing of this next act.
Well, I do believe it is a fair question. I mean, is there implications in what you do internationally with the new act coming into place in Canada, and what are those implications? And are discussions ongoing to try and deal with whatever the implications may be? I think that's a fair question.
Well, Chair, I agree. It's a fair question, and I think what I could do is I could take that question back on notice and return to the committee with a proper answer. That's fine. Is that okay, Tom?
Hey, can we just put a date on that within 2 weeks of today's meeting?
We're at the Chair's availability.
We're out for a week, yeah. If we could have it in a couple of weeks, that'd be dandy.
Great. Can I now move on to OSFI, please? My question's for OSFI.
I took some of your time.
Thank you. Do you, I'm just out of curiosity, do you calculate the cost of compliance for business to comply with the rules set by OSFI? And in this case, specifically the banks. At any point, did you calculate the cost of compliance for the rules that you set in order for the banks to be able to comply with the regulations set forward to prevent, money laundering operations? I know people who work in the banking industry, so I'm familiar with some of what happens in the branches to try and catch situations where persons are engaging in illicit activity and trying to conceal it. But I'm just curious if there's any data that you collect on the cost of compliance.
Our focus is with respect to the quality of controls that the institutions put in place to manage their risks. With respect to the cost of compliance, we do not aggregate that information.
And Mr. Beaudry, for FinTrack, do you collect any information on compliance costs for private organizations?
Sorry, we do not. No, we do not aggregate those costs. We don't have those figures. We understand that private sector is investing heavily in compliance matters, and we are very sympathetic to this, and that's why we're trying to alleviate their burden as much as possible. An example of that, if I can offer, is with Project Protect. Again, what we did essentially is to sit down with the reporting entities, particularly in the banking sector, and identify to them what are the type of transactions that would be the most meaningful to report to FinTrack in the context of human trafficking. What has been distributed to committee members just before this meeting is about Project Guardian, is in the same vein. If we talk about trafficking of illicit opioids and fentanyl, what we did essentially is to sit down with the banking community, with major money services businesses, and again, with them, identified what would be the most meaningful information to provide to FinTrack to help us combat money laundering in the illegal opioid field. So recognizing the cost of compliance, we keep an open dialogue and a very what we think is a positive dialogue with the private sector to make sure that we achieve the right balance of keeping the country safe, keeping Canadians safe while combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other threats to the security of country, protecting privacy of citizens, and as well making sure that the private sector does not bear all the cost of the compliance to the regime. So it is a fair question, and this is something we take very seriously at FINTRAC.
Julian.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope that we can review all of that we can ask other questions to these people. We don't have enough time to deal with all the questions that we have. And I understand that our time has been shortened today, but I hope that we will be able to pursue the discussion. And I'd like to thank you for your work. It's extremely important. You have all the resources, and what we're reviewing right now as a committee is to make sure that everything is in place so that you are able to do your work correctly. I would like to talk about two articles. First of all, in La Presse, talking about the cannabis issue and the investments coming out of fiscal tax havens. It was said that the system in Canada makes it so that Canada is becoming an easy way. People are telling investments, come and make a rapid amount of money. You're not going to pay taxes. It's like a sieve. And if you structure this correctly, you're not going to pay any taxes, and this is perfectly legal. And so when we talk about all these issues about fiscal tax havens, one of the issues, and I'm going to come back to other questions in a few moments, is this entire issue around coordination between the organizations with regards to tax havens. Even if you've been consultants, two agreements have been signed recently with Antigua and Barbuda. And so have agencies been consulted in this regard when Canada is signing agreements with countries that are fiscal tax havens? And this has a huge impact on money laundering.
Out an hour and a half ago from the prestigious Guardian newspaper in Britain. The headline is How Canada Became an Offshore Destination for Snow Washing. And it follows just brief extracts. Canada is one of the world's most opaque jurisdictions when it comes to identifying the owners of private companies and trusts, according to anti-corruption campaigners who say that more rigorous checks are required to obtain a library card than to set up a company in the country. Anyone can start a company in Canada. It costs about $200, and the owner of the company can remain completely anonymous, said lawyer Maura Johnson, who recently authored a report detailing the country's lax rules around corporate registration. A 2013 study by American researchers ranked Canada worst in the world among 60 countries, along with Kenya, in terms of setting up an untraceable company. And this opacity, described in a recent Transparency International report as the, quote, getaway car of financial crime, has become the perfect vehicle for snow washing, the use of Canada's positive image to tout the country as an offshore destination where suspect transactions can be legitimized. And it goes on to cite, in 2009, estimates of $15 billion a year being laundered each year in Canada, mostly through companies where ownership is unclear. So my question, the two questions in English I'd like to ask. First off, what is the amount now that you estimate is being money laundered through Canada, whether that's through offshore tax havens, an increasing number of which we're signing treaties with, or through other means? And what do we need to change? Obviously, you're working very hard. You're doing a lot of good work with scant resources. But when we're getting the reputation internationally for snow washing, what needs to change so that you can do your work more effectively?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think it's a very, very good question again. So to address your first question, we don't know what is the exact amount of money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada. We don't have that numbers, and I don't think anyone has it. To arrive at that number, we would have to calculate, okay, the amount of the drug trade in Canada, the extent of fraud, the extent of corruption, the extent of tax evasion, and any other crime that generates money. So we don't have that numbers, and we would also have to take into consideration the criminality that occurs overseas and the proceeds being placed in Canada. We have a very attractive financial system. It is very sound, very solid. So yes, Canada is an attractive place to launder money. But our financial sector has robust safeguards in place. But because of its soundness, this is a place where kind of international investors want to be. When it comes to beneficial ownership, I think this is one of the key aspects of this review, Mr. Chair, with all due respect. I think this can go a long way to fill gaps that have been identified internationally, particularly by the Financial Action Task Force. So I think you have the Department of Finance rightfully identified this issue, is consulting on it, and we are looking forward to the views of this committee on this issue. In relation to tax evasion, I will let Mr. Lambert just extrapolate, just elaborate just a little bit on this matter for you.
Mr. Lambert, we're going to quickly run out of time. We're out of time for you, Peter, but if you could give us a quick answer.
Just mention the context of your question on offshore and so forth and the aspect of the Panama Papers. Earlier today, CRA just announced that they had done a number of searches, and much of the information, the intelligence that was provided that supported those searches was as a result of the significant contribution that FINTRAC has made in relation to working towards tax evasion and money laundering in Canada.
Okay, I can see where we're going to have you back. Mr. Fergus.
Thank you. And I would also like to thank all the people that are here and all the witnesses. And given the late hour, Mr. Baudry, I would have two questions for you. What measures has been taken by G20 to combat against the proceeds of crime and the funding of terrorist activities? And what measures should Canada take, given what is being suggested by action groups and the G20 with regards to money laundering? And secondly, are there type of information that are absent and when the declarations with regards to operations, but that actually should be collected by FINTRAC? And Mrs. Ring, I would have one question for you. In what measure is your office and FINTRAC, do you exchange information in the framework of your agreement? And when we're talking about anti-money laundering and terrorist activities, are there fields in which the memorandums of understanding could be improved, agreements could be improved to improve cooperation between both organizations? Thank you for the question. So essentially, the assessment that the International Financial Action Group did with regards to Canada, they've identified two significant points for the Canadian regime. First of all, has to do with the absence of lawyers as declaring, and also the beneficiaries. So these are central issues to improving the regime, the current regime. These are not issues that are easy to resolve. They're very complex. The issue around inclusion of the legal profession is specifically from a constitutional point of view is complex. So the research that will be done by the committee, I believe, will be quite important. This is a it's a huge lag that has been noted by the FATF with regards to the Canadian regime. Now, with regards to information that could be useful to FINTRAC, I believe that, first of all, I'm thinking about a virtual money, digital or money, or cryptocurrencies, bitcoins of the world. And
when FINTRAC was created, when the law was originally adopted. So I think it needs to be updated in that aspect, and I think the government made a kind of signals in that aspect. And I think the second category is in relation to foreign money service businesses, those that offer services to Canadians. Again, when the legislation was adopted in early 2000s, this was not envisaged. I think this is a sector that is in strong emergence. We're talking here about the PayPals of the world and others. So I think, again, this is a kind of service that, a financial service that is offered to Canadians. So we need to make sure that information that they have that could be relevant to money laundering or terrorist financing is sent to FINTRAC. So again, I think that the government is also committed to look at that issue as well. So in terms of information gaps, I think those are two that would advance our work significantly. Madam.
Thank you. With respect to the relationship between OSFI and FINTRAC, there is an MOU that permits the exchanging of information. We do exchange information with respect to the federally regulated financial institutions. And in addition to that, we have been working collaboratively to work more efficiently and to reduce the regulatory burden with respect to our on-site assessments of the FURPHI sector. So this is an ongoing relationship that we have with each other. We are, we recognize each other as an important regime partner, and are.
So great. I'm glad that you guys have an MOU and you're working out. I knew that, but I was just wondering, in what ways can you be working better? What can you identify places where you feel that there are some gaps, and what would be desirable to make sure that there is even more cooperation or more effective cooperation? Can you give us examples of when you said that we could, we're working more efficiently? Mm-hmm. How, and then what are those gaps?
Right. In the FATF Mutual Evaluation Report, it was recognized that there could be opportunities for us to work more efficiently. We are very focused on the scope of our work with respect to on-site assessments to ensure that we are reducing the possibility of duplication of efforts, and that we are leveraging off of each agency's strengths when we are assessing the quality of an AML ATF program at a FURPHI. In addition to that, the regime itself is more proactive with respect to working groups, and both OSFI and FINTRAC, as well with our colleagues at the Department of Finance, are engaging with the public sector, or the private sector, with the financial institutions with respect to ongoing issues, communication and sharing of information that helps them to comply with their obligations under the AML legislation and expectations in the regime.
Thank you. In order to balance it up, can we go 5 minutes over so it's balanced in terms of the questions? Agreed? Mr. Albus, 5 minutes, and then we were supposed to adjourn at 5:30. I know it's Valentine's Day, and we get pretty severe orders to that effect, I'm told. Mr. Albus.
Well, since it's Valentine's Day, I just wanted to reinforce the expectation of the committee to Mr. Bell is that when we ask for an answer, our constituents are expecting us to do our jobs. So I do hope that you come back with a substantive response to Mr. MP Kimmic's concerns, and I do appreciate the chair reining in to do our job well. We deserve those things. I'd like to go to FINTRAC, Mr. Beaudry. First of all, in regards to the ongoing compliance, the cost of compliance with FINTRAC, if you don't measure it, how do you know that you're being efficient?
We are very confident in the efficiency of the agency when we see results that are being published and shared with our partners. Law enforcement, national security agencies, and others regularly come to FINTRAC and increasingly come to FINTRAC for financial intelligence.
There's a clear difference here. There's a clear difference between having efficacy and efficiency, because credit unions in my area and right across the country often are small. Banks, other financial institutions may move out. And when I hear that they have common reporting standards, FATCA, as well as FINTRAC compliance, and that those costs are continually going up, and I hear that you come here and you say, we don't track that. To me, that thinks, I understand your mission is absolutely necessary, noble, and needs to be done, but that kind of attitude doesn't really promote confidence that you're doing this in the most efficient way. What gets measured gets done, but also you can improve upon those things. So I really would hope that you're also looking at this. I have actually heard through my discussions, and I've spoken with hundreds of credit unions, that there have been cases where FINTRAC has placed a fine over the designation of a particular type of work that someone does, and fined that particular institution for every transaction that that person did. Have you ever heard of that before?
Maybe I can help bring some clarity to that, especially with the credit union. They are definitely a big center in in the regime. When we do look at a fine, it starts with a compliance examination. Like I said before, we have a risk model that selects entity to do compliance to see if they're fulfilling their obligation under the Act. That's to the extent. It's not an investigation. The deficiency from that, we look at a scope and a sample. So I would say that we'll look at a particular scope period of time in the transaction, and we'll look at a certain sample. So, and it's only in cases of very egregious non-compliance.
Have you heard of that before? A small administrative error was done, and they were fined for every single transaction that had been done since that clerical error was done. To me, that doesn't sound like it's an effective use of anyone's time.
Well, I think I haven't heard of that.
Okay.
But we look at the sample, like I said, so it wouldn't be all transactions. So let's say usually we look at a 6 months period. So we'll do a sample of 100, large cash or, bank deposit or whatsoever. So but our program works on instances. So I think that's where we're lending itself, that the program itself will look at each instances of non-compliance. So it's probably from that angle that you're hearing that. So if it's a systemic, and there's regional judgment, if it's a systemic issue, we go at the heart of it and the cause. So if it's a system glitch or whatsoever, we...
Yeah, well, I would hope so, because it did sound a bit over the top, and again, it's hearsay. Okay. Now, that being said, I'd like to talk to OSFI. OSFI, in the last session, we had Department of Finance officials here. They did say that FINTRAC does do a lot of transactions, or follows a lot of transactions in the non-regulated mortgage space, and they have a lot of data. Now, in your memorandum of understanding with FINTRAC, do you receive that information in any shape or form on the unregulated market?
We do not, and we only receive information pertaining to the institutions that we regulate, which are those that are the federally regulated institutions.
My understanding, though, is that you're also responsible for financial stability, but you just assume that only is just within the federally regulated space then.
So our mandate is directly.
So that wouldn't be of interest, though, to decision makers to have no more information about the unregulated space from a federal perspective?
So I would, with respect to those that are responsible for the mortgage issues, it perhaps is, it's not an area of my specialty. My focus is on AML only. And OSFI's mandate is only pertaining to the federally regulated financial institutions.
Okay, very, very short.
No, okay, just to make a statement, again, I have asked FINTRAC at previous meetings in regards to this, but I think that there is a lot of data that could be aggregated that would be able to give decision makers, whether it be here in Ottawa or whatnot, that would not violate any personal privacy or charter rights of any individual, that could be used to give decision makers, whether it be in CMHC, OSFI, Department of Finance, the Finance Minister himself in this case, by aggregating some of that data, there's a lot of, as we know, there's a lot of compliance costs and good work that's done, but there's also a lot of aggregated data, and I just really encourage that because that's a gap I really see in our current system.
I think we're going to have probably ample time to discuss those areas when I look at this discussion paper. Okay, so with that, just in terms of, is it possible for you to show committees a mock report that either a credit union or a bank would have to fill out with ABC company or something on it? It just is, it's easier to understand the burden of paperwork to filling out a form once we see it. If you could, there's no doubt you're going to be called back again. So if you could bring that with you, and Mr. Bell, if you could try and have, if you could have an answer by about the 28th, we meet then as well. Okay, with
just seeing as this is the last meeting before the February week break, I just wanted to know what your plans are for the supplementary estimates and whether your intention was to call the minister for that, because I think we only have 3 meetings. There's so many breaks in between now and when the supplementary estimates can be considered by the end of March.
We haven't made any plans yet, but I can see where we're going to have some extra meetings, and we have to deal with supplementary estimates at some time. So, and I think we only get 2 weeks in March, right? So we will deal with it. We may have to call an extra meeting. With that, meeting adjourned. Thank you.